on skirmish of the Persian Gulf War, and there may be more attacks tonight. News 4's Eric Thomas talked with some local combat veterans to see what our troops can expect.
Confusion, fear, and excitement. That's what combat veterans say our Marines near the Kuwaiti border are feeling after trading blows with Iraqi tank battalions. Those forces rumbled across the border into Saudi Arabia early today, and hours later, when the smoke cleared, a dozen Marines were dead. These 3 men are all Vietnam vets, former Marine riflemen who've tasted the fear of a firefight.
You know, the adrenaline gets flowing, and naturally the Marine Corps training kicks in and say, okay, well, you know, we're taking fire. I've got to do this, this, and this, and, you know, make sure I keep my head down.
Preliminary estimates show that our troops along the border gave better than they got, but the fighting could pick up again, and the vets say that waiting can be the worst part.
I mean, if you're in combat all the time, you know what to expect. But these guys, you know, they're sitting around waiting.
But what's it like to hear the sound of incoming artillery fire, to know that enemy tanks are nearby ready to rain death on your friends and colleagues? It can be worse than you think, but only when you have time to think about it.
After it's all over is the time when I really sat back and thought, boy, that was scary.
I always say I'm ready for combat, but you never know how really nervous you are until it really starts happening to you and when you're around it.
However, these vets say they are proud of the way the Marines are handling themselves in the war. A couple go further, saying they would gladly go and fight again if called. Eric Thomas, News 4, St. Louis.
Keener Plaza was the backdrop for a rally in honor of our country's POWs and MIAs this afternoon. Area veterans gathered to remember soldiers who never returned from battle. Singer Michael Martin, a highly decorated Vietnam vet, performed for the crowd. The event was sponsored by the St. Louis Area Veterans Consortium.
During a visit to Vietnam's military headquarters, the senators were given pictures, papers, and artifacts that once belonged to American soldiers. However, the lawmakers left unconvinced American soldiers had ever been kept there. A local Vietnam vet isn't surprised.
If I call you 2 hours ahead of time and say I'm going to come and see if you've been holding our American prisoners against their will, do you think I'm going to leave anything laying around?
Now, the senators believe the U.S. should normalize relations with Vietnam in exchange for the information already received.
American POWs in Russia. Yeltsin tells reporters it is very possible that there are a few of them still left alive. And he says some are Vietnam veterans.
That news is of great interest to one St. Louis man. He is still waiting for his brother to come home from that war. The 2 News team's Paul Shankman reports.
How you folks doing? Chris Bora doesn't really remember much about his brother Dan, but he thinks about him every day because he believes his brother is still alive, a prisoner of war. Yeltsin's comments give him hope, but his experience makes him skeptical.
Too many times we've seen reports like this come out and then our government deny them or come up with some excuse or reason to disregard them.
Chris's brother Dan was the Navy flyer, last seen parachuting to safety over Vietnam in 1972. Last summer, the family received a picture of a man in Laos purported to be Dan Bora. Chris went to Laos to find him, but he didn't succeed. Now, despite Yeltsin's claims, Chris has no reason to believe his brother is in Russia, but he certainly believes someone's relatives are.
We all know that the Soviets were involved, and it's just no surprise that they wanted technical information and would take prisoners for that information back to the Soviet Union to interrogate them.
Veteran Terry Toenges makes his living dealing with POW questions, and he, for one, finds great promise in Yeltsin's claims.
It gives me goosebumps. It's something that I've always felt, that there are live POWs left from Vietnam, possibly Korea, and this only reinforces my beliefs that, you know, yes, they're there.
A Pentagon spokesman admits the U.S. has heard similar claims before, but they've never checked out. Meanwhile, a senator on the Special Select Committee investigating the POW-MIA issue believes aid to Russia should be put on hold until the issue is resolved. Tom and Don?
Okay, all right. Thanks a lot, Paul.
Okay, a Vietnam Veterans Group reached out to help the children of vets with special needs. A workshop was held today in Forest Park, where some families of Vietnam veterans went for a canoe ride. Besides the fun and the sun, the workshop was to identify children in need of support. The workshop was sponsored by the Vietnam Veterans Leadership Program. That's a group funded by an out-of-court settlement from the makers of Agent Orange.
As the Gulf War intensifies, the emotions and trauma of combat are returning to many Vietnam veterans.
The 2 News team's Betsy Bruce looks at how these vets are coping with their darkest memories.
The images flickering across the TV screen at Muffin Red's bar are haunting. The pictures of America's newest war trigger both memories and physical reactions.
The initial feeling was I was nervous. I was scared. My stomach was upset. I was kind of shaky inside.
When I started watching those Scud attacks, it just, I was back in Anwar. I mean, my whole body just goosebumps. Yeah. And even yesterday was really bad for me because of the Marines. And, when I heard about 11, 12 Marines getting killed, all I could think of were, the close friends of that had killed. And yesterday was a hard day for me.
Vets like Brewster and Toenges recognize they suffer from post-traumatic stress. They are the lucky ones.
There are vets out there that don't know why they do what they do. They haven't been able to associate why they have the nightmares, why they have the sudden response to a loud noise.
The stress and trauma of war isn't necessarily limited to combat veterans. Family members of soldiers may feel some of the same symptoms but may not recognize them.
Well, veterans say the majority of homeless vets in the St. Louis area served in Vietnam. They say there's a great need for transitional housing for these vets to get them off the streets and back into the mainstream. As News Channel 5's Julie Beard reports on the Night Beat, veterans raised money today to create that housing.
Over 100 people turned out at the Jefferson Barracks Amphitheater tonight to listen to live music and to raise money for homeless Vietnam vets. Organizers say veterans need a place where they can transition from the streets to their own home, transitional housing.
Well, it's no one really knows what the actual numbers are. Estimates about 2,000 homeless veterans in the St. Louis area during any given year, and about 3/4 of those are Vietnam veterans.
This is transitional housing for Vietnam veterans in Jefferson Barracks. It's been open for about a year and a half. Veterans say it's funded by money from a class action lawsuit against the makers of Agent Orange. About 60 vets have called these 3 buildings home. Here they are given a job and are forced to save half their money.
After he secures his employment, he then has a mandatory savings program, and he saves that money until he's got enough in the bank, and he's able to move out into his own place.
For James Singleton, who was homeless a year, it's been a blessing.
Well, it's got me a job, and I've got money in the bank, and I'm going to buy a truck now, and I'm going to do some hauling on the side, and I'm going to just get my life together, finally.
Here there is space for 24 Vietnam vets. With the concert money, they hope to create some permanent housing and transitional housing for all homeless veterans. In South County, Julie Beard, News Channel 5 on the Night Beat.
A candlelight vigil was held tonight in downtown St. Louis at the traveling replica of the Vietnam Memorial. The exhibit is indeed much smaller than its counterpart in Washington, D.C., but as Channel 4's Lois Ford Long reports, it bears all of the names and all of the impact of that memorial.
Okay, 59, let's start here. You got 3, got 6.
There he is. It has a way of drawing people to it, to look, to touch, to remember. Even though it's a miniature of the wall that stands in the nation's capital, its power to move people today was not diminished. You could see it on the faces, sense it in the quiet of the crowd, hear it in the voices of the veterans.
To me, it's peace. This is where I get serenity and a way to try to make sense of it all.
The wall also drew to itself today another group of people, families of soldiers still missing, families whose loved ones are also listed here, families who still believe there's hope. Judith Graham is one of them. Her brother was shot down in 1968.
I believe that there's every chance that I could see him alive one day, but this wall is a constant reminder to people that there are still men missing, but also those who gave their lives.
Many of the people who find themselves moved by this wall say it's not just because there are so many names of so many people. Part of the power of this memorial, they say, is because they can reach out and with their hands touch just one single name.
With the names being etched in there the way they are, and you can run your fingers across and feel the names, and it makes you feel like you're that much closer to the people that you've lost.
In special ceremonies, and in song, people today were reminded about both the values and the cost symbolized by the wall. As one woman put it, because people forget. But etched deep into the sides of this memorial, 58,000 reasons to remember. In downtown St. Louis, Lois Ford Long, Channel 4 News.
And let's go to Deanne Lane.
Dick and Kevin, a few minutes ago, we saw a group of veterans from all of the wars, Korean, Vietnam, World War II, as well as Operation Desert Storm. And joining me right now is a local Vietnam veteran, Terry Toenges, and thank you very much for joining us. How do you feel about this parade?
I think it's very exciting. It's a good chance for us to come out and say thanks to the Desert Storm troops and get some of our people out here who didn't have their parade when they came home.
While it is basically for Operation Desert Storm, is it also the people's way of saying thanks to you?
In some respects, yes. We've gotten a lot of applause, too, as far as the Vietnam vets community. I think the patriotism is high, and we're kind of getting a belated thanks from a lot of people, too.
I think the loudest applause so far was when you walked by with some of the veterans from World War II and the Korean War.
Yeah, I thought a lot of people were standing up, giving us a standing ovation. It gave me goosebumps.
Happy 4th of July, Terry.
Thank you.
Kevin and Dick.
Thank you, Deanne. A survey was made, Kevin, that indicated that 25% of the American population alive today was not alive during the Vietnam War. 50% weren't alive during Korea, and 75% were not alive during World War II. So there are a lot of people in this country who were having their first experience, really, with the military operation that we had in the Persian Gulf.
It's been said that in times of great stress, like war, humans turn to ritual and ceremony for guidance and relief. Although it's been years since America's last full-scale conflict, with its body bags and broken dreams, the pain of those touched by Vietnam and the sadness of those who lost loved ones in earlier wars is fresh on Memorial Day, the day set aside to remember.
You have some people that Memorial Day is nothing more than a day to go out and party, go fishing, camping, etc. And then you have the other group, the people that remember why they're here, why we have our freedom.
And tonight, those still missing in combat zones were also remembered.
When my son, when he turned 18, he registered for the draft, and he says, "Mom, if I'm sent to war, can you guarantee me that I won't be left behind too?" Then what do you say?
Tonight, as taps was played and candles were lighted in remembrance of fallen comrades, this service appeared different from earlier ones here, different in that it didn't matter whether your war was Vietnam or World War II. War is war, and death is death.
Ours was a little bit different war, but yet now they are accepting us. There was a little gap in between us there for a while, but I think it's coming out very good right now.
Given the number of St. Louisans who gave their lives for their country, tonight's turnout was tiny. But for those who did participate, the feelings of pride and grief seemed to blend together, much as the two generations of soldiers who were just now finding their common ground. For Newswatch Downtown, this is Lori Waters.
They came from all over the country to be at the memorial on this holiday. Vice President-elect Al Gore and former hostage Terry Anderson took part in the official ceremonies. Anderson had a reminder for all Americans.
The quiet grandeur and the nobility of this beautiful memorial demands of us an equal nobility. It demands forgiveness and reconciliation.
But most of today's visitors at the wall were there for personal reasons. Former Marine Corporal Terry Toenges and his wife Linda traveled from St. Louis. It's actually Toenges' 6th or 7th visit to the wall.
It's a chance for me to kind of come back and say hi, you know, to see the guys that, my friends, and guys that I lost, kind of my once-a-year time to be with them and, you know, share some special moments with them.
Toenges placed a copy of a prayer at the base of the wall. It's entitled, "Someday We'll Be Together." The former Marine voiced the hope that America may finally be giving Vietnam veterans their due.
Desert Storms had a lot to do with that. People have begun to appreciate Vietnam and Vietnam veterans more and the sacrifices that they made.